Welcome, everybody, and thank you, Mark, and the ACHE Southeast Texas chapter for hosting. I'm here with a number of colleagues from the CARE Collaboratory, Sherry Bright and Dr. Gary Oftedal, who serve as ACHE faculty with me. And we have Dr. Jean Bate, John Kramer, and Rachel Oftedal, who are serving as our guest artists to give us opportunities to experience neuroaesthetics this evening. So, just briefly on the Care Collaboratory, it is a not-for-profit that's dedicated to creating a healing ecosystem for the workplace and the workforce. The healing ecosystem acts as a pathway to optimizing engagement and performance because it nurtures a climate of workforce thriving where everyone feels heard, respected, and cared about as well as cared for. So in the past 2 years, several times, the CARE Collaboratory has offered 4-week ACHE virtual interactive education courses that cover the Healing Ecosystem Framework and also an in-person cluster course. All of us give to the CARE Collaboratory because we believe there is a better way to support organizations as they provide healthcare to communities. For more info on the CARE Collaboratory, including blogs, videos, reference lists, bios, any of that stuff, later you can check out our website at carecollaboratory.org. So, why are we here this evening to explore neuroaesthetics and have a bit of fun? Well, the story behind that is Sherry, Gary, and I were teaching at the ACHE Boston cluster last year, and we brought up the idea of improving the brain's working conditions by integrating aesthetic experiences into daily work. Well, the resulting conversation in the class was so robust and positive, we've been pining to offer another virtual interactive education course focusing primarily on how neuroaesthetics can contribute to a healing ecosystem. So this evening is a teaser to gauge interest, and we would love to get some feedback from you at the end of this session. And confession time, there is a lot of great stuff out there on neuroaesthetics. So it's been a bit challenging to keep the content, given all we'd like to talk about, to about 90 minutes. So it's been a tough one. So with that, let's get started. Let's see, make sure this is going. All righty. So with that, let's get started. In all our programs, we are big fans of interactivity, and what better tool than everyone's cell phones? We use a program called Slido. So all of you, please get your phones and use the QR code that's on the slide here, or go to slido.com to access the application. Our first Slido is on the next slide, so you'll see it pop up on your phone to participate. So I'm going to do this myself as well. We're all going to participate. There we go. All right. All right. All right. So we have an active poll up here already. In all lowercase letters, if you would, put in one word describing how you are feeling as this program begins. Well, it looks like everybody's in a good place for this evening. Oh, awesome. All right. All right. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Gary. And so he can give us a little background on a healing ecosystem.
Thanks, AC. Before we begin, I'd like to simply invite you to notice your own response to what you are seeing. These images of a sunset over water may feel calming, may feel grounding, perhaps even familiar. Now consider this. Nothing about your workload has changed, no policy has shifted, no new initiative has been introduced, and yet something in your body and mind just did. That's the essence of what we mean by an aesthetic experience. The way what we see, hear, and sense shapes how we feel, think, and respond. In healthcare, those experiences are happening all the time for our patients, our families, and our workforce, which is why, as we think about building a true healing ecosystem, which AC described, one that integrates leadership, structure, climate, and individuals, we believe it's no longer enough to focus only on what we do. We must also pay attention to what people experience. Today, we're going to continue introducing the emerging field of neuroaesthetics, the science behind how sensory experience influences the brain and behavior. You'll hear briefly from colleagues who will ground us in that science and then bring it to life through examples of sound, color, and visual imagery. Our goal is to begin exploring how these insights might help us more intentionally shape environments so that the systems we lead don't just deliver care, but truly support healing. Our model is basically interested in introducing neuroaesthetics, which is the intersection of neuroscience and aesthetics. Aesthetics is really how the sensory experience that we feel engages the brain to influence emotion, attention, and behavior. And neuroaesthetics is really the study of how the brain processes sensory experiences to shape this perception and shape the behaviors that we may seek to accomplish. How our brains and bodies change in response to art and aesthetic experiences, we believe will be critical to implementing more of the elements of the model we're going to discuss briefly. But there really is a difference. Oftentimes, when we think about the arts, we think about the arts as something that is regarded as music, painting, dance, photography, oftentimes performance galleries, very passive or optional and added on, but seen as separate from what the real work is that we're doing. Whereas what we are feeling is through our understanding of neuroaesthetics, we're becoming an understanding of the importance of the aesthetic experience, how the felt impact of what we see, what we hear, what we sense. And this is occurring everywhere all the time, much as it did when you were looking at the sunset pictures. And this all helps to shape the stress, attention, and trust that we might see. And it's really not a preference, something we can choose to do. It is often a biologic response. So why is this important as we look at our model? Our model of the healing ecosystem is really composed of these four elements, which are interrelated. And it's really an intertwined, interconnected model that's based upon a better understanding of how we need to address these four elements to move forward. As in the leadership issue, as healthcare leaders, we don't just make decisions moving along. We don't just make decisions, we actively shape the environment people work and heal in. That environment sends constant signals about what matters. Through our words, our behaviors, and our priorities, we curate the climate. We model safety and trust, signal long term commitment, and help people stay grounded in purpose, the why behind the work. Leadership here is less about control, but more about holding the vision, supporting the why, especially when things get hard. And as we all know in healthcare, things are getting hard and likely to get harder and more complex. The second element of our model is that of structure. A healing environment aligns processes and roles with purpose. When systems are designed well, they create clarity and make the desired way of working the easy way, not the hard way. This goes beyond physical space. Environment includes workflows, expectations, communication, and culture. In our model, we are intentionally designing for healing, not leaving it to chance. And understanding how neuroaesthetics has an impact on structure is going to be critical to moving that forward. And the third element of our model is that of climate. The difference between climate and culture is that culture is oftentimes a deeply embedded DNA, which can really take a long time to change. Whereas the climate is more similar to what are the vital signs, the blood pressure, the pulse, the actual thing, the emotional feelings we have within the environment right now. The healing environments shape how people feel, not just what they do. They influence the feeling of being connected, of belonging, and trust. and they reflect an understanding of trauma and human stress. Psychological safety matters as much as operational safety. We often measure vital signs, metrics, dashboards, but the deeper issue is this organizational DNA and the climate that we create, the felt experience of being here, working here, and receiving care here. And certainly, neuroaesthetics and what we're going to hear more about from our three guests is going to be important in integrating into the work we do. And lastly, is that of the individuals. True healing environments build capacity for healing by recognizing the value of who people are, not just their roles, not just their productivity, not just their efficiency. When individuals are able to bring their own lived experiences, their own meanings, and identity to the work, engagement follows. How we can use aesthetics to increase that sense of engagement and that sense of meaning is going to be critical in moving forward. People are far more likely to contribute, innovate, and stay committed when they feel safe and genuinely valued. The human dimension is not optional. It is critical to organizational success. And the human dimension is not able to be addressed unless we truly increase our understanding of the power of neuroaesthetics and the importance of a better understanding of neuroscience. And now, by the way, since we're going to be dealing with neuroscience, let's learn a bit more about the neuroscience behind what's driving this. Gene, can you help us out there?
Gary, thank you. Um, so I have to put a disclaimer because sometimes people fall asleep when you start showing sections of the brain. But I also want another disclaimer is to say I'm an infectious disease doctor who has a lot of interest and experience, particularly in trauma and the way the aesthetic experience actually helps in trauma. So with that warning, there's a couple of things that we should share. Is that how our brain develops. And we used to think that it all happened very early. But what the key principle is that the brain is development is directed by the genes, that's the structure, but it's sculpted by experience. So the experience we have actually creates a process that's highly adaptive and it allows for the future action to be based on earlier experience. So this way the neural system develops becomes really central to understanding the next part, which is the fact that it's neuroplastic. And we used to think that neuroplasticity would end with, early childhood, but we found out a little differently. So on the next slide, you'll see the idea that it is a lifelong ability to reorganize not only structure, function, and connections in response to extrinsic stimuli, learning experiences, or injury. And I think it's really important because, those of us who had clinical training, when we looked at the anatomical sections, it really looks very unalive. These things are actively moving, connecting, reorganizing, and reshaping. And so if there's any other a person interested in neurophysiology on the call, I would love for them to speak up as we go forward. But the important thing is that given this evolution of the way it happened for the human, given the way it develops in us as human beings, and given the way it continues to develop, it really leads to the next thing. And the next thing is that the WHO did a scoping study of about 3,000 different research papers and things, and they actually found that arts, aesthetic experience, promoted good health and actually helped in prevention as well as the treatment. And I refer you to that if you want to really look at the background work. But the bottom line is that we have, particularly with neuroimaging, we have good evidence of the way that this might work as we bring sensory data into us. So before we talk about these three systems here that are ignited by sensory or experiences, aesthetic experiences, it's important to understand that the it's important to understand that all of the senses, except olfactory, go through the fight or flight centers of the brain. And that was very good for evolution because you would hear something and you'd react. But when it comes to our environment, when it comes to a healing ecosystem, when it comes to the trauma that people are feeling, that makes a big difference. So with that, these areas that light up with an aesthetic experience really fall into these three: the sensory motor that you see, the evaluation and emotion, and the knowledge and meaning making. And just a quick aside, but turns out galleries and museums have figured this out long ago because they realized you could see the sensory component in their exhibits. You could find meaning and emotion, but you really didn't know what was going on. So they started putting little placards, information on the side of the painting so that you could read to understand the cognitive component. Now, what's important about this, on the next slide, you'll see that it actually does stimulate the default mode network. And that's that deep sense of an aesthetic moment that evolves in our sense of self in the aesthetic state. So think about the sensory inputs coming in, being dispersed to these three specific areas that we've talked about, and from that, impacting in a neuroplastic way our sense of self. And the next slide is really the way that a lot of researchers are putting this together. An aesthetic experience produces meaning, knowledge. What is the context, as Gary was just talking about? What is the expertise? What is the understanding cognitively? The emotional side, what does it feel positive, negative, reward, wanting, or liking? And then the sensory side, the perception, the motor system, particularly in dance. That actually leads to what's called the neuroaesthetic triad. That experience creates this triad, and what we hope to show you as you listen to sound, look at color, see images, will reflect on how that actually is operative and what does that mean for you. And then finally, the understanding, that's what I do at Tulane University, about leadership is really you being, as a leader, empathetic to the followers, knowing where they are, as Gary said, knowing the trauma that's there, knowing how they perceive things, knowing what their environment is. Your leadership is about your authenticity. So your understanding about the way that you work with aesthetic experiences as well as the other leadership competencies. So the neuro arts now give you an additional capacity to lead and create positive change. And the Neuro Arts Resource Center, which has come out of Hopkins, you can see the URL there has an incredible amount of information about this. And we'll leave that for you to look at another time. But for right now, what we'd like to do is take you on a journey of these sensory experiences, these aesthetic experiences, and have a chance to kind of feel and look at that. And so I'm going to turn things over to John here.
Hey everyone. Thank you, Gene. Good evening. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I'm going to turn off my camera while I'm presenting and so that I can refer to my notes and you won't be distracted by a talking head. So, my name is John Angelo Kramer, and my background includes leadership and organizational development work, alongside a long history as a concert violinist. So, I'm glad to have the chance to explore this topic with you. I'd like to focus now on sound as one entry point into the broader topic of neuroaesthetics. In healthcare, we often pay close attention to what people see. What people hear also matters. Sound shapes how a space feels, how attention is directed, and how experience is carried in the body. So, for the next few minutes, I want to look at sound as part of the care environment. This segment will be brief and experiential. I'll offer a short framing, then we'll move through two listening examples and consider what they may suggest for healing environments. By the way, to get the most out of your listening experience, use a pair of headphones if you have them so that the sound surrounds you and minimize any ambient sound in your environment that could distract. Okay, with that out of the way, here we go. Next slide. So, sound does more than carry information. It can influence bodily state, attention, emotional tone, and the overall experience of an environment. That makes it relevant to neuroaesthetics, which looks at how sensory and aesthetic experience is processed and how it shapes human response. I want to use two short listening experiences to examine two overlapping ways sound can influence experience. The first example emphasizes sustained vibration and bodily response. The second adds music more explicitly, including pattern, emotion, and association. Next slide. Very briefly, here is the science bridge. Sound is a mechanical wave. Unlike light, it requires a medium. It moves through matter as a pressure wave, and its speed depends on the properties of the medium. The denser and hotter the medium, the faster sound travels. Said another way, sound moves through that hot, sticky, humid Houston air, but it moves faster through the water in our pools, and even faster through solid mass, like the bones in our body. A second useful idea is resonance. Resonance occurs when an external vibration interacts with the natural frequency of another system. The main point here is simple. Sound is physical. It is not only processed as meaning or music, it's also encountered as vibration moving through the environment and through the body. That does not mean every sound affects every person in the same way. It does help explain why sound can register so directly in human experience. Next slide. So for this first example, I'd like you to listen in a very specific way. As you listen, notice any changes in bodily sensation, breathing, attention, or emotional tone. You do not need to decide whether you like the sound. Just observe what happens while you are listening. Afterward, I'll invite you to put a few words in Slido about what you noticed in your body, your attention, or your emotional state. I'll let the sound now speak for itself. And Claire, please start the recording. All right. Take a moment first to get back to the room. Ground yourself, perhaps rub your hands together a few times, and then post a few words in Slido. What did you notice in your body, attention, or emotional state? While you are typing your responses, I want to invite the panel to share any thoughts about what they noticed. Sherry, would you like to share? And Claire?
Relaxation. It was like that my heart was being regulated by the background beat. And so it was very soothing.
Thank you. Rachel, Gary, Rachel?
Yeah, it was the best description I have is that old trick where have someone do that to make the fake egg crack over your head to relax you. Just makes my entire like brain head just sort of relax and soothe. That's the best way I have to describe it.
And and for me, John, you've done this before. It's the same thing. That immediately I sense this fullness or sense of comfort in my chest. It's just an incredible sense of, and then it slows down the breathing. It just surprises me about how I immediately felt that across my chest and around the heart.
Oh. Gene, do you have any thoughts?
John, I'm fortunate to have a good sound system here, and one of the things that I really like are the lower notes that are very grounding and very connecting.
Thank you. So as I note, thank you for all of you. I'm looking at the comments on Slido, and what I see is I'm seeing bodily sensation, changes in breathing, the relaxation, the lightness, the mother heartbeat. I'll go ahead and share with you all that frequency you were hearing is the heart frequency. In other words, each organ resonates at a certain frequency, and that is an F, if the music tone F base. And that, so if you felt anything in your chest, any sort of vibration or anything, that wasn't a coincidence. So the point of this first example, before sound is processed as music, it can already register as a physical event. Next slide. This first example puts the emphasis on sustained vibration and bodily response. Some of you may have noticed sensation in the body, a shift in breathing, a sense of settling, a sense of activation, or a change in how your attention was organized. The point is not that everyone responded the same way. Variation is expected. What matters is that sound can register as a physical event before it is interpreted as melody, memory, or meaning. So, this first example helps us notice how more directly the vibrational side of an auditory experience. Next slide. Now, for the second example, I want to add musical structure. You'll hear three short excerpts. As you listen, notice emotional tone, memory or imagery, changes in attention, and differences across the excerpts. Again, the question is not only which one you prefer. The question is what changes in your experience as the music changes. So after the three excerpts, I'll invite you to post which excerpt affected you most and what changed. So let's listen for effect as much as preference. And Claire, when you're ready, go ahead and please start the recording. All right, now go to Slido on your phone and take a moment to answer the following question. Which excerpt affected you most and what changed in your experience? So first, just which one affected you the most? They were the Native American flute, there was the Enchanted Ballroom or the Gothic Waltz, and Happy by Pharrell Williams. While people are voting, panel, would any of you like to share which excerpt affected you the most?
Oh, I would say hands down happy because I'm physically incapable of not dancing along to that song.
Yeah, I saw you moving. Yeah.
Me too. And I knew it was coming up. So,
You
yeah.
know, looking at the polling, the Arumbai, the Native American flute, definitely made an impact. It affected a lot of people. Gary, what about you?
Yeah, it was interesting because maybe it's just that I have my attention span can shift quickly, so they all impacted me. But the Aruba just created a sense of calming and peace and reflection, and almost maybe looking out over those sunsets again and doing that. And then quickly, as we get into the Enchanted Ballroom, it was a different type of thing. And then finally, the energy of happy was there. But the Aruba did it for me just because of maybe the frame of mind or where I'm at in my mind right at this point in time.
Yeah, okay, good. So, folks, I want to ask you to answer another question. What changed in your experience? And this is a free form thing. So, I will just share for me, I noticed my mood changed as I was listening to each excerpt. And so my mood and my mental state just seemed to change very quickly with each excerpt. Like calm to on edge to fun, heart rate, mood, energy. Panel, what changes did you experience?
Well, I was, all calm during the first experience of listening to sound with the heartbeat. And once we got to happy, it was certainly faster.
Well, what
John,
I'm seeing, oh, I'm sorry.
no,
Yes.
I was just going to say that, these systems are connected, so the hippocampus holding memories. So for the first one for me, I visualized and went back into a car trip into the mountains and valleys while we listened to the Native American flute. And it was very much connecting with the history and the memories that piece of music elicited in the process.
Yes, the memories that are associated very strong. That particular one, the Native American flute performer, is a colleague of mine. He actually lives in Holland. And so when I hear that and I hear this particular recording, I immediately think of him and some of the collaborations we did musically. What I'm seeing now is a more varied set of responses: mood, imagery, memory, preference, tension, release. Once music enters, the experience becomes more layered because people are responding to pattern, expectation, emotion, and association. Next slide, please. So, this second experience adds layers beyond sustained vibration alone. When sound is organized as music, listeners may respond not only to sound itself, but also to rhythm, temporal pattern, melody, expectation, tension and release, memory, and association. So the distinction I'm making here is practical. The first experience emphasized vibration and bodily response. The second emphasizes musical pattern, emotion, and association. In real life, those dimensions overlap, but separating them for a moment helps us notice that sound can influence human experience in more than one way. Next slide, please. The leadership implication is that healthcare environments are acoustically consequential. Sound conditions are not neutral. Environmental noise has been associated with patient sleep disturbance, and music-based interventions may help reduce anxiety and pain in some healthcare settings. So the point is not that every healthcare space needs music. The point is that sound is already shaping experience, whether intentionally designed or not. If we want to think seriously about healing environments, we have to pay attention not only to what people see, but also to what people hear and what hearing does to them. Thank you for the opportunity to share this with you today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Rachel.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the slightly less formal part of your daily or your presentation. My name is Rachel Oftedal, and I'm here to talk about a bit about color. I said, trust me, I have an MFA. Those are my letters. I have spent an entire career either in theater or actually in the commercial arts, even though I've been trained in the fine arts. So my big thing is actually, I was going to talk about color because it matters even when you don't know it. And what's been interesting is listening to what Jean was saying and listening to more of how John was presenting. Um, even in talking with the Care Collaboratory folks over the years, it has been fascinating to me to realize, like, a lot of these realizations that are now getting solid neuroscience behind them and all these things are things that humans have intrinsically known for forever. We just haven't had the hard evidence. So mine is a little more about overall perception, including getting into just some of the cultural implications of what color can be, because color is nothing more than light. It is light waves reflecting at certain frequencies off of surfaces. That's what gives us color. It's why you don't see that much color at night, because there's not light waves bouncing off of surfaces to give you color. So can I have the next slide, please? So the first thing is just kind of what do you just react to in environments? And again, like I said, I do not have empirical evidence. I have anecdotal evidence from a lifetime of experiencing this, studying this, knowing from the work that I have done, whether it be television installations, whatever, of how much color, pacing, all this stuff can impact an individual. Next slide, please. Just a few. So this is just some visceral color in physical form. This isn't studies. This isn't anything. This is just things that generally have massive impacts upon people immediately, just with sight, sheerly from color. Next slide, please. So the first one, if you are not already familiar, this is the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona from Antonin Gaudi. This is honestly, these are pictures that I took while I was there, possibly with my jaw scraping along the ground the entire time. Because Gaudi, to me, this particular cathedral is one of the finest examples of stained glass window where they are relying on brilliant color to tell stories, to inspire, to trigger feelings of faith, all this sort of thing. And although, granted, the Sagrada Familia has a few more secular windows than, say, Notre Dame or something like that, it's the same impact when you walk into this space that is filled with light and color. Most people tend to feel somewhat transported or lighter, or, for some people, this deepens their faith if they are believers. It can have all sorts of effects on people. Next slide, please. And especially in this particular case, like I said, all color is light. So when the light comes really blazing in, it's like the entire wall is set on fire and you're just in awe of it. You cannot help but be inspired by it. Next slide, please. That being said, it doesn't mean that cool colors don't work as well, because that's also a very interesting thing about the Sagrada Familia is the very careful way in which the spectrum is laid out throughout the cathedral. But in this case, blues and greens, which traditionally can be associated with more calming things. In this case, they have a lot more energy with them because of the context of them being in this cathedral with the sunlight beaming through and the context of everything else happening around you. In stark contrast to this cacophony of color and light and all these things that are happening around, can I have the next slide, please? There's James Turrell, which, if you have ever experienced one of his exhibits, and for those of you who are in Houston, you can. A lot of his stuff is there. James Turrell, everything that he does, he is an artist who deals with space and light. And it's always tends to be deceptively simple. And why I say deceptively simple, it really is. It's one color and light in a very simply shaped room, but the effect is profound because what he tends to play with is something called the Ganzfeld effect. And this was discovered, well, I can't say it was discovered. It was studied in the 1930s by Wolfgang Metzger, where he started to realize that if you are in some sort of situation where you just have color, a single field of color, and it's in front of you, it's enveloping you, it's taking up your entire space, it can actually cause you to start having hallucinations. And the reason why I say this wasn't discovered is that there are theories that this was known thousands of years ago by followers of Pythagoras going into pitch black caves so they could completely void themselves of all senses and get visions and hallucinations of what they might of more to gain more knowledge, all this sort of stuff. In this particular case with James Turrell, there is something about a bright fuchsia where it is simultaneously energizing and relaxing, but then can also be unnerving the longer you stand in it. And then if you could go to the next slide, please. This is another installation of his that is also simpler, but that blue. And I would actually ask you, I unfortunately was not smart enough to do the Slidos, but I would ask just to even for yourself, be like, what would your reaction be? Think about what would your reaction be sitting inside that first room of solid pink versus this one of blue where there is a break in the visual field. You do see this band of white, but it is still a very simple, calming, enveloping space. So these are just very visceral things because you can literally stand in the middle of these colors and you can experience them. The thing that where my brain just when I first started when AC asked me about doing this is my brain went in about 1,000 different directions because to me color is everything. It's light is for how you perceive the world, and granted, this entire thing is very much geared towards sighted people who are probably not colorblind. But color is also very contextual in very, very many different ways. So the first part that's the most baseline is I wanted to strip this all down to two colors. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So I'm not going to go too long into perception, but perception is where the way two colors are installed or are presented to you in their context can actually alter how you perceive the color. There's a very famous book on this, Joseph Elber's about perception of color in various contexts. Um, and if you go to the next slide, please. So we start out with a basic gray square. Take in the gray square, think of what color it is, kind of stick that in your mind. Next slide, please. All right. So here we have another set of colors. And AC, actually, if you want to just go back and forth one more time, please. Oh, nope, that's fine. If it will let you, there you go. Okay, so now you got next slide, please. If you've got them both in your mind. So, okay, good. Next slide, good. And the next one. They're the same, it's the same color. And what I'm willing to bet is that for a lot of people, that gray square changed, it looked lighter or darker depending on what it was against. And this is just a very basic thing of perception where how colors are presented together shift your perception of this, which I find very fascinating. And AC, if you can go forward again, and now all of this, the next couple of slides, It's all the same color, but pay attention to how you perceive that gray in the middle based on the color that is around it. And also because the other fun part, because this is part of my job, all of you are going to be perceiving it differently, not just because of your own particular eyesight, because color is subjective, but also because you are also all literally looking at this on different monitors. So colors get tweaked, things look different in every single location. So some of you might see more contrast, some of you might see less, some of that might be based on your eyes, some of that might be how it is on like if how it is on your screen. So if you could please go forward a slide. And one more. So for most people, I'm guessing you probably saw a shift in the gray. So it looks a little darker against lighter backgrounds and lighter against darker backgrounds. And this is called the value changes. One more, please. And it's all still the same. And one more, please. And now I changed it. And then it gets really obvious. So that's one way in which the context of color really matters. And the context also is very much cultural. There is a lot of association. There is a lot of association out there with colors. And in Western cultures, we tend to think of white as purity and all this sort of stuff, whereas in a lot of Asian cultures, it is used as a color of mourning. Um, and actually, this slide is blue because I wanted to bring up the color blue. In Western cultures, blue, is part of, again, part of weddings, something borrowed, something blue. The reason something is blue is associated with purity, associated with the Virgin Mary. The Virgin Mary was blue because the most expensive pigment in the Renaissance era was was ultramarine, which is made from lapis lazuli, only mined in Afghanistan. So that's a very much a cultural reference. It's not that blue inherently has any properties. It is entirely the cultural perception that leads you to think that it does. So that's why color has a there's really interesting sets of biases and all this stuff. And I could probably talk for the rest of the entire session about the history and color theory, but I'm not going to bore you with that. Next, please. So what about color when it's not just isolated, when it is actually part of an image itself? So similar to the sunset photos that my dad was showing at the very beginning, similar to even the color, I was noting the color palette in John's entire presentation. You will note that it was there were some there was an intentional use of color and it was in a very muted, relaxing set of tones and all that sort of stuff. And again, in the context of how he was presenting, it helped tell that story. So next, please. So color is technically also texture. Everything we see, all texture, is just an interaction of light over surfaces. It's not that, so this is a fuzzy curtain. And it's not that the curtain itself is changing color, it is that the way the light plays over it shifts how we perceive the color that leads us to believe it is a fuzzy surface. The next one, please. And then there's color versus movement. So this can apply in all sorts of ways. And again, Gina talked about the hippocampus and all this sort of stuff. There are certain motions, for example, like if you're in a bar and you see a TV and it's playing off up there, like we immediately, like it's one of our deep instincts to, oh, there's motion, let's go see it. Color and movement also matters because not just color in the way that it looks in a static frame, but when color moves, so if you can hit the next thing to make it go play, something that was calming might be somehow not as calming once it becomes weird and bubbly or tense and twitchy or there's no sound effects on here, but I've had people mention this feels like they should be hearing like screeching rubber across things, or that's just what they think. Next one, please. And so this one in particular, sometimes even your personal background can affect how you see this. So if you can hit this and create play, I created this as this, kind of crinkly background that I wanted to smooth out into this gentle yellow thing. And I remember AC said it was a donut and all this stuff. But then I was in a meeting with a bunch of medical people who all referred to it as a bowel obstruction, I believe. So your personal background can also affect how you are perceiving something. Next slide, please. And then there is also time. I'm an animator mostly by trade, so I spend an inordinate amount of time thinking about time. It's one of those things where, strangely, this sounds more existential than it is. We all exist in it, but we don't really spend time thinking about it, at least in these microcosms of literally 1 nanosecond to the next. So, in this particular case, the contrast of colors is helping allow you to see the form. And then the time goes along, timing this all out so that the color appears and then goes away through these forms is timed along with a breathing exercise. And it's that classic, breathe in and breathe out with each separate cut. So this time, and there is no sound on this, but I invite you to solely do this, go along with the visual. So as the lines appear, breathe in and hold and breathe out. And we'll have a couple more rounds of that. All right. Oh, one last one. I forgot I have one last one. All right. So again, color and time, the simplicity or complexity of an image, all of these things are intertwined, which is why actually my big challenge in talking about color as an aesthetic experience is that color, it's very hard to separate out one sense from all the others. But we had to give it a try. Can I get the next slide, please? Hey, and there we go. So thank you for my very non-scientific color. It matters even when you don't know it. This is it really does start if you start paying attention to color in the world around you, um, environments that make you feel happy, environments that make you feel unsafe. Look at the way hospitals have been redesigning. I live in Chicago, so the best example I have is the Lurie Children's Hospital. It's insane and bright and colorful and cheery and helps to make kids at ease. There's all sorts of examples like this. Um, and I could go on. However, the next visual artist is up, and that would be Jean.
Rachel, thank you very much. What we want to do in this 5 or so minutes is sort of pull together these concepts that you've heard in terms of color and sound, and I'm going to really focus on visual imagery. And Rachel and I are good friends, but I'm going to use black and white without any color to make the point. And I would like this to be a little different. You've heard sound and music, and you put in your experience. Rachel's led you through the process of how color impacts so many dimensions in terms of our neurology. I'd like to invite you to let me tell you my story of an aesthetic reset, and then maybe you can do something similar if you're so inclined. So I'm sorry, tried to change the slide. Um, my my background is in French Acadiana, in Louisiana, in Lafayette and St. Martinville. And I grew up there with the poem, Longfellow's poem of the story of Evangeline, about the Acadians from Nova Scotia that were exiled because of their religion, and they ended up in St. Martinville. And you guys in Texas are not very far from it. And what I thought would be to take my camera back there and explore the thoughts, feelings, and emotions that I had by revisiting, returning, doing a repetition back to where I grew up. And so, what I'd like to share with you is that journey, and then suggest that you might actually be interested in doing a journey that would be similar, and see if that aesthetic reset actually does help in terms of your perception of self, your sense of positive emotion, your knowledge of you and your history, as well as having the sensory motor experience. I don't know if you've noticed, but through the last two presentations, the aesthetic triad has come up over and over again. Different words, but same underlying physiology. So this is the statue of Evangeline, who is part of the very famous Longfellow poem. She waited under the Evangeline oak for her um, for Gabriel to come because they had divided the women in some boats and the men in other boats. And it's personified by one of the wait staff that's in the little restaurant right next to the Evangeline Oak. So I'm going to walk you through this idea of taking environmental portraits as being a opportunity to go back, to repeat, but to do it with an aesthetic experience. So I'm going to show you a few pictures, make a few comments, and then suggest that you might want to do something similar. So this is Mr. Clément. Um, he's a sugar loader at St. John's Sugar Mill. And cane sugar industry is central in Acadiana. And to me, not only hit the persona, but also the environmental context of the very dark open door, asking questions about where we've come from and what's going on. And a very genuine individual that personified the um, underlying economic base of the area. On the next slide, you'll see Mr. Andre. When I grew up, Mr. Andre had a general store on the corner, and he would tell stories of Acadiana, and tell stories of Evangeline, and he'd sing and dance for us in French. And we bought the 5-cent moon pies in his store. And this is him after he's closed his store, retiring. And it makes me a little sad because he was there by himself. He had a lot of beer that kept him going through the day, but he was very lonely in terms of the end of his life. It's still a real treasure in terms of the aesthetic experience growing up in the region. The next one is Mr. Thibodeau, who actually had a cafe and a barber shop. You don't find too many of those where the barber will serve you food. And he was playing solitaire in between customers. What I liked is the fact that the infrared film in this image actually did not photograph the red cards. So they're kind of hard to discern. And the idea of him being part and parcel of this legacy of the Acadiana diaspora in a very unique way, creating an aesthetic reset when we'd visit and have a meal there. On the next one are the Romero brothers under the Evangeline Oak, and they would play Cajun music for the tourist. And if you know anything about, and John can comment on Cajun music, but most of the time it's sad and lonely and longing because of the history of the Acadians. And they would entertain the tourists. And what I really liked was the fact that they were looking off into the distance with that melancholy look, standing under the historical Evangeline Oak. And the next one is Ms. Thomas, who is actually a guide at the Nottoway Plantation. A very strong individual with lots of stories, but the one that really touches you and causes you an emotional response is that she is the tour guide in the plantation where her grandmother was a slave. And so you really did connect with her and her story. And the next one is Miss Paul in her home on Church Street. And lots of memories here because this is my grandmother. And you'll notice that her connection with her family and the images that you see up there. So if you think about it, thank you. If you think about it on the next slide, what happened is I took a camera to do environmental portraiture to discover, have a deep sense of who I was, where I came from, and what changed or didn't change in returning back. And this actually helped me create a generative self-narrative. And I pose that for you or present that to you as my ecstatic experience to give you sort of a case study. And you'll see as AC presses the next button that the knowledge that goes along with these images was part of the diaspora of exiled people finding a new place to set up a culture that's persisted with Cajun food, Cajun music, etc. And that meaning and knowledge helped informed. And the next part was that the sensory and motor experience by doing, talking, and taking pictures of people in their environment created that second part of the aesthetic experience. And then the next one is that it really did connect with an emotional component and a sense of belonging. So that's my story. And I will suggest to you that those are some of my favorite people images. And what I think we'd like to offer you is a take-home assignment where you find an important place, where you go to that place, explore it, look and see the details, observe not only what's in front of you, but what you're feeling at that moment. Then take a photo with intentionality, as Rachel has said, and collect the photos, organize them, tell your story, focus on the senses, the meaning, the feelings, your body responds as you view each, and then share it. Share it either as a portfolio or a storyboard, including your thoughts, reflection, and feelings of others, and giving you a chance to take the cell phone out of your pocket and instead of snapping images, consciously going through a process that gives you an aesthetic experience so that in the process of doing that, you have that neuroplasticity that informs our sense of self in the default mode network. So just to end this part and turn it back over to Gary, most of us think of ourselves as thinking creatures that feel, but we're actually feeling creatures that think. Gary?
Actually, I think uh,
Oh,
AC
we're going to do another Slido first. Yeah. So everyone, we're going to do another uh, word cloud. So similar to what you did in the beginning of the session, please provide one word describing how you're feeling now, and if you could do it all in lowercase, that would be helpful.
damn it.
All right. Lovely. All right, Sherry. Sherry, you're there?
We we seem to be having audio trouble this year.
Okay. Gary, can you
Oh, sure.
take over?
So I want to take this back from, I think we introduced initially the idea that there's more than just the typical things we think about in changing healthcare and working in healthcare systems, and in fact, in more than in the healthcare system, but across our communities. And I think we, by our model, has reflected the fact that with the interrelationship between climate, structure, leadership, individuals is critical, but the pervasive nature of neuroaesthetics and aesthetic experience across this is going to be critical to move forward. And we heard three great presentations in my mind that sort of at least in my mind, as someone who came from the science area of healthcare, to step back and maybe reassess and rethink what it is that really is important that we need to be thinking about in our dealings with how we manage the systems we work in, the communities we live in, the people we work with, and the patients we care for. So, but what does that all mean? I mean, a lot of theory and a lot of possible interesting stuff, and I wish I have a million more questions. But let's just say, well, what can you do tomorrow? What sort of things could be examples of that? Well, look at the leaderships. If you think about that, the specific actions, a calmer, slower pacing of speech. Believe me, do I know about that? Your posture. Do you look forward and engaging? Are you restricted? Do you have your arms crossed and look threatening? Do you pause before you respond? Are you making eye contact? Are you engaging in a facial expression? These are all examples of creating part of that aesthetic experience that you could begin to do tomorrow, that whether you realize it or not will have an impact upon the people with whom you're working, with whom you're living, and with whom you're engaging. So those very simple, basic things could happen with leadership. But what about structure? Well, we certainly see a lot about that, but think about this, that what kind of lighting do we have? Do you have natural lighting in meeting spaces? What type of things do you have? Thinking about what John said, both between a reduced noise environment, but what other kind of sounds that could you use to have an impact upon that? How are you introducing nature and then any agencies of nature, the use of plants? Is it cluttered or not? Look around where you're working and see how it looks and what that might be as far as that. Simple things that really are things that could directly affect the aesthetic experience that people are having and directly reflect back to how we can have a better chance of implementing the healing ecosystem that we think is so necessary. But the climate, the vital signs, the emotional and social well-being, what are things that you could do? Welcome the meeting with attendings with music, a brief story. When I used to have meetings, when I worked in my former organization, I used to say I wanted people laughing with me or at me within 5 minutes by doing something that got them comfortable with music or a brief story. Whether you like it or whether you think it or not, that can set the tone to create a climate that totally impacts the next part of the meeting that you have. Do you have a silent? You could start with silent reflection, giving them a chance to think, to set where they're thinking about that. How are things set up as far as chairs, as far as the room structure? Do you have circular seating rather than sort of the typical hierarchical meeting? How might that contribute to composing a climate that would have people feel more engaged and less threatened and less segregated? And rather than using heavy text info, much like this slide, using visual images, much like my Rachel did during her presentation, and some of what John and what Jean did also. And lastly, that of the individuals, the people who we work with, and recognizing the importance of their individual traits. Then, we always say that our employees come first, but do they? So how do you begin? Can you begin the meeting with motion, stretching, and breathing exercises? I work with a dance troupe that has done great work on understanding how dance and motion and music and stories can have a significant impact upon people's engagement and sense of belonging and sense of and their values and their that they feel. How can you incorporate dance or movement to engage participants? It has been amazing what I've been involved with the dance troupe I work with to see what they can do in assisted living, in long-term care, in community engagement, in people coming in from immigrants to work together to get people to feel engaged. Are we using pictures of staff or positive images to help create a sense of meaningfulness, letting them know that they are worthwhile and interesting? These are just some very basic examples. And as I'll turn this back to AC, but I just wanted to say that for me, having been in healthcare for over 40 years, I realize now that while we focused a lot on some of the very objective areas of healthcare, tried to avoid the subjective, isn't this all subjective about how we feel, what we experience, what the emotions that are caused us, what we are seeing? And don't we need people like Rachel who comes from the background of the arts and the color and that, people like John who comes from the area of the whole issue of music and is concert violinist to help influence us to do a better job of creating the environment which will promote the healing ecosystem that we wish to see in place. So we hope to today will at least pique your interest, and I saw that from some of the words you put that it probably has, but this was only a teaser. What can we do that'll be more? What can we do to go further this? How can we learn to do this better and be more mindful of that so that we are actually doing this by specific design rather than accidental happenstance? So AC, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, thanks, Gary. So what we have here is courtesy of Sherry and her husband, who are avid sailors. As sun rises, we had sunsets. to start our session, and these are sunrises in some of the Grenadine Islands. Here's another one. So while we're looking at these lovely images, what I'd like everyone here to do is now that you've been made aware of stuff that you intuitively already knew about it, but now that you've been made aware via context and experiences, what are some of the things that you've seen in your workplace? Think about those. What are some of the things that you like to do in your workplace, or even just for yourself personally? So what we'd really like you to do for us is we're going to have just a few more Slidos where we'd like you to just give us some feedback on this presentation so that we can gauge interest and take this to be honest, to national to see if they're interested in having a more involved course. And then we'd like to open it up to you folks to maybe share some of the things that you've thought about. All right. So here we go. And there's just a few of these. So you just on your Slido should show up and then you just press one of the numbers.
It's enough. Come on, AC. Come on, AC.
Oh, we're getting a lot of fives. That's awesome. All right. Okay. And next. All righty. And next. All right. And all right. I think we have one more. Oh, all right. And evidently I misremembered. Here's the last one. This is what ACHE uses. Okay, great. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and so we can go to where everyone is. And oh, now I get to see who all's here. All right. So anyone want to volunteer on what you've thought about in terms of, I know, Rachel, you shared what is the Children's Hospital there in Chicago. Anyone else want to share? Some of us other than us faculty?
Can you hear me? This is Sully.
Yes, very well, Sully. Welcome.
Yes, way back, I was a dialysis technician at Walter Reed, and there was a patient room across from the unit. It wasn't used all the time. I was on the 3 to 11 shift, and to try to make it as much as or more bearable for the patients, we would play music and we would sing. And by nature, I am loud. And a couple days, it was the last shift Friday. So on Monday, the colonel, the head of the unit, came in and said, Michael, come with me for a minute. And she went into that room across from the unit and said, I'd like you to lay on that bed. And I did. And then she said, one of the other techs, Smitty, she said, Smitty, I just want you to do what you guys and Michael are doing on the show and sing. And he starts singing. And she said, how you responding to that, Michael? Holy crap, was that loud? And it may have been because of my posture laying down, but it was a lesson, the degree to which sound carries. And I could imagine, depending on the mental state of that patient, especially if they're trying to sleep and not done out of any disrespect, kind of unawareness. And we
Mm,
would close the door. We weren't, stupid. If we started get, we would close it. But a lot of times you'd think it was normal. Our volume of talking and sound was normal. Not if you're laying in that bed. So that was one of the lessons I learned in taking care of patients relative to the sound variable.
excellent. Excellent. And how long ago was that?
Well, that was back in the 70s as a
And
dialysis.
you still remember it like it was yesterday.
Oh, when a colonel tells you you're doing something wrong, you remember it.
Oh, that's a great story. That's a great story. All right. Who else wants to share a story? Just,
So I'm going to take exception. I mentioned the dance troupe, so I see Chris Anderson on here. Chris, you must have something you could say about how your work and how this would, how you feel, how this relates to what you do.
oh, a dance troupe person. Awesome.
Just honored to be here and I'm so excited and just for provided this kind of deep background. I'm so grateful. But I mean, just a story about story. We were in a hospital in southern Minnesota doing this ongoing residency. So we're training nurses and then actually doing programs on some of the floors. And then we wound up and had a big dance hall event in the lobby of the um, hospital with a local dance band that traveled down to New Orleans, was down part of that action down there every year. And anyway, but the nurses one morning were all weeping. We came back from this experience. They're all weeping. And because they just witnessed a man, Jim, who was so depressed and just in a wheelchair, but we involved him in a folk tale, an enactment of a folk tale where we needed the king. Jim, will you please be the king? Oh, no, no. Please, Jim, we need the king to say yes. And all he did was said, yes. And then bam, his whole demeanor changed. The nurses are weeping. He and his wife are the first ones down in the lobby that evening for the dance hall.
Wow. Who else? Who else would like to share? I see Laura McGarity from Architect. Would you mind sharing what you with everyone what you have in the chat?
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes,
Oh,
yes,
good.
thank you.
Sorry, I was having a problem unmuting. Yes, I just put in the chat. I love to go to immersive installations, all different kinds of things. And so I put in the chat a couple of places that I think really encapsulate everything we talked that was covered tonight. So there is a immersive uh, experience in Miami called Super Blue, and all of the installations uh, deal with all of your senses, and it's in a warehouse district. And in fact, if you could only go to one of these places, I would say to go to Super Blue in Miami, because it is overwhelming in a good way to be. There's visual graphics, there's sound, there's music, there's um, temperature changes, all sorts of things. So highly recommend that. There's also another place called the Color Factory. I know they have, I think they may have opened one in Texas. I'm not sure. I'm in Kentucky, but I went to the one in New York City and Chicago, and the whole experience is all about color, and it's a great activity. And then Meow Wolf is a very intense installation. If you've never been, uh, it's like a museum and a playground and a uh, very surreal dream all at once. And so these spaces, I think, are really excellent, especially if you are working with someone that you want to use vocabulary and language to talk about what they like and what they don't like. These types of installations, I find, get people talking. As an interior designer, sometimes it's really helpful for me, for people to, our clients, to articulate what they don't like. Sometimes if someone tells me what they don't like, I can immediately hone in and know what they do like and what makes them feel comfortable and what makes them feel good, just in hearing a few reactions of things that they don't like. So I wanted to share that.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that very much. Anyone else? Well, while we're waiting for folks to kind of get their thoughts together, I can share when I was a fellow uh, in the uh, in the late 80s, showing my age there at the medical school. I was in psychogeriatrics. And so we had a clinic, we had some grant money, and we had a clinic that the focus was maximizing independence. And you can imagine that we got a lot of families bringing their loved ones who were suffering from dementia and various, and sometimes it was something organic, but other times it was polypharmacy. And then we were miracle workers because we actually brought their loved ones back by straightening that out. But I was just handed the responsibility of designing this clinic for this kind of thing. And I remember accessing some of my artist friends, and they said, here's the kind of thing you need to do. And so I found this artist to create these works that use the various colors that Rachel was talking about, and just put them everywhere. And we had a sliding glass door that you could just slide through. And of course, the CFO thought I was nuts, but at any rate, he finally was willing to do it. And the just the impact of the calmingness of coming to a clinical place in this case. And again, this was in the late 80s. So a long time ago. So I didn't realize what it was, and still I started learning more and more about neuroaesthetics, and there's actually neurobiology associated with this. And so, Jean, I don't know if you wanted to sort of add on to that in terms of, in just in that field alone of
Well, AC, the thought that comes to mind, I'm sure some people on this call have scanners in the pediatric part of their institution. And you might go in and you might notice that it's painted as a spaceship or as a pirate ship. And what was really interesting is when GE developed it, they were looking at the children being scanned. And that goes back to John's sound, because the sound of a scanner, if you've ever been inside one, is really loud. So what he began to do is think from a human-centered design point of view that incorporated the aesthetics and said, why don't we give the kids a story that they are going into a pirate ship, and the sounds they hear are going to be the pirate sounds, and they need to be very quiet. And when they get through the trip, they will get a treasure, a reward. So they painted the scanners, and you can see that really all over now. It's fairly common practice. And what was interesting is that you were going through the aesthetic triad. You had the change of knowledge, the concept that you're not in a scanner, you're in an adventure. You had the sensory motor in terms of the sounds and the experience, and you had the emotion that you were having fun. And the
Hmm.
important thing to clinical medicine is that before they did this, the anesthesia rate was about 80% for the children in overall. After they did it, only 20% of the children needed to be sedated to do the scan. And what was fun is that in doing an ethnographic assessment, the fellow who'd invented the scan was sitting in the waiting room when a little girl came out and said, "Mommy, that was really fun. Can we do that again tomorrow?" And so you begin to see the relationships between what we've been talking about and actively redesigning and leading human-centered care so people don't hurt so much.
Yeah.
AC,
Hey,
that was my thought.
may I jump in just for a second? That was beautiful, Gene. I wanted to just very quickly share my anecdote. So my father, he had Alzheimer's and it was toward the end of his life, and he was at Methodist Hospital, and it was around Christmas time, and he no longer spoke. He couldn't open his mouth, and he was just like in a coma practically. And this was an example of not necessarily a neuroaesthetic policy that was in place, but more of an accommodation. He was in the ICU, and the nurses or the staff, they were wonderful. They allowed me to bring my violin in. Of course, I wanted to be very quiet, but I wanted to just play a tune for Dad. My father was from Greece, and it was just a traditional Greek tune. And it was associated with Christmas, so a Greek Christmas carol. And I put the mute on so I wasn't making much sound. And I'm playing. And of course, he's in bed still. But I saw his index finger starting to move up and down with the beat of the music. So at some level, he was listening and his body was responding. Similarly to when I saw Rachel starting to move her body when the Pharrell Williams song came up. So kudos to the staff that allowed me to do that and to connect with my dad before he passed in a way that, music was the language that could get to him at that moment in time. And so I just wanted to share that um, even as healthcare systems look to see how they can create more space for neuroaesthetics, that there is this that it's already happens in very individual ways. And so, anyway, I just wanted to share that.
Thanks, John. Maria, you have your hand up?
Howdy. I'm in kind of noisy place, so I hope you guys can all hear me.
Yep.
I know of a
Hmm.
company called Theracoustic that produces vibrational sound therapy. And um, basically, imagine something that looks like a psychiatrist chair, right? That has four big transducers, kind of like speakers underneath it. And, the base of it is wood, so it resonates like a violin or a guitar, right? Or a woodwind musical instrument. And imagine laying on this thing and you've got headphones on and you're listening to beautiful musical compositions that are tuned to activate various levels of the chakra system in your body, right? Based on the key of music. And you're feeling the vibrational sound therapy through the chair. It's what's happening with those transducers, those speakers, is you're feeling the vibrational energy of the music while you're listening to it. And so it stimulates oxytocin production
Hmm.
because you're experiencing it through your skin, through your whole body, kind of like a hug, right? You're getting that tactile kind of feeling, plus you're also listening to it. And it's opening up and tuning and activating your chakra system. And now imagine that not just as a relaxation modality, which is profound and can help you get into a meditative state once you entrain the ability to, really relax with this music. But now imagine it in a chemotherapy chair. They've built it into recliners that can be used for medical procedures, for chemotherapy, to relax patients. And they're experimenting with it now at Thomas Jefferson University Hospital in Philadelphia in their integrative medicine department. They have a full-blown integrative medicine department. And they showed this thing at the Association for Integrative Health and Medicine conference that was done in Philly last October in conjunction with Thomas Jefferson University Hospital. So this is this has so many implications. This has tremendous implications in helping people relax during procedures, when you're confronting a very scary, life-threatening disease, or in psychiatry, to help patients to relax and calm down, if they're feeling anxious, and potentially to get them into a state that helps prevent violence. It's also great for staff, because staff experience so much vicarious trauma all day long, right? That in order to keep our staff healthy and retain them, it's nice to have a way for them to really profoundly relax, through a combination of music, the actual vibrational sound therapy that is felt, um, and then the environment. Like they'll when they prepare these rooms, they use calming colors or beautiful imagery, to help, maybe views of nature, to help people get into a relaxed state. And to the degree that you can use sound and music and actual vibrational sound therapy to induce a calming state, you can do a whole lot of people a lot of good. I've experienced it myself. It feels amazing. So if anybody wants to learn more about it, ping me, mariatalalo@me.com, and I'll be happy to get you connected.
Thanks, Maria. Well, with that, Mark, I think we are about out of time here, probably a little over time. Just want to let everybody know that we will be sending out, or actually, Mark will be probably sending out to you. We're going to provide a PDF with some information for everyone in case everyone was madly writing notes or anything, so that you can have some stuff, as well as our group is going to be meeting in the morning to see what else we might add for people to have as reference. So, Mark, I want to turn it back over to you and say thank you for having us, and on to the next thing.
All right, everyone, take care, and we'll hope to see you soon.
All right. Thanks, everybody.